Doug McCreary is a retired specialist with the University of California, and Doug has an extensive background and career working with a number of different things in the natural resource environment, but one of them being oaks. He has been referred to by many of my colleagues as our oak specialist, and he's going to start off with this first talk on fire in oak woodlands. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug.
Well, it's always a pleasure to come down here to this area. I know it's been some time since I've been here because I drove down Highway 49 from Grass Valley this morning, and a couple new stop signs, couple new lights, and the road was straighter in places. It looks like it's bypassed a few of the communities it used to go through, but a very scenic road. I moved to Grass Valley to take the job with Cooperative Extension and the University of California in 1986. A couple of years after that, we had what's called the 49er fire, 1989, which was very devastating to our community. In fact, my partner, my partner Therese, though I didn't know her at the time, lost her house in that fire. So I certainly have some appreciation for the hardship everybody's going through. You know, I think we lost 250 homes in that fire, and that seems dwarfed by what you've lost here. So it's a tough situation. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about oaks, and hopefully maybe these can work into some of your management plans. Well, as previous people have mentioned, fire is not new to California. There are techniques to evaluate fires. This is some dendrochronological work where you can go back and cut down trees that have survived fires and look at, you can see evidence of when fires occurred and kind of piece together how frequently they have happened in the past. Native Americans, it sounds like there's the high level of knowledge in this group based on the questions and some of what the speakers have alluded to, but obviously the situation a couple hundred years ago was much different. Native Americans actively burned the environment on a regular basis. They did this for a variety of reasons, to drive game, to make areas more open for collecting acorns, to just keep areas more fire safe from catastrophic fires. And this, you know, is well documented and went on for probably up to 10,000 years in California before the gold rush. The fires were usually low intensity and didn't destroy the above ground, the trees in general. They didn't have ladder fuels which would connect the low elevation burning to the higher elevation. So they had a much more benign impact on the environment than the fires that are taking place today. Okay, just last slide. So everyone pretty much agrees that certainly in many places in California and in the oak woodlands, it was a much more open environment, you know, wider spaced trees, some grasslands between them. This is a current photo, obviously, but it kind of tries to illustrate what the environment may have looked like a couple hundred years ago. Well, then came the gold rush, and I drive by Coloma, of course, coming here this morning. I'm not saying they got drunk and set fires intentionally, but there certainly was a period when there were much more intensive fires starting in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And there was concern. I mean, there were some huge devastating fires in California, so the government established this pattern of trying to put fires out. And this, as you know, is our Smokey the Bear. It was quite effective, and this has been documented. There was a fellow who did a study, you know, probably 25 years ago now, but he went around and he had photo points where he looked at what the environment looked like, early 20th century and what it looks now. I think there were 70 or 80 of these. And the environment has changed. Obviously, the effects of fire suppression created a lot more growth of tolerant species that could grow in shade. They became much thicker truffers. You had more ladder fuels. And so, as a consequence, fires that do start today become much more devastating, become crown fires, and have these terribly adverse consequences. One thought currently, and I don't know if anyone else is going to talk about prescribed fire, so I thought I would just mention it a little bit, but this is a fire that's set intentionally to try to consume some of the fuels that are out there to try to reduce the likelihood of a horrible catastrophic fire taking place in the future. It seeks to mimic natural fire and remove flammable materials, also used to control vegetation and to remove noxious weeds. But this is not without problems, and you probably remember the Los Alamos fire of, I don't know, probably 10 years ago now, but that was a prescribed fire that got away. And this is everybody's nightmare, that you try to intentionally set a fire to improve the environment and reduce risk, and it gets away. So that's one of the risks associated with it, and so this technique probably isn't as used as much as it could be. Another major concern is smoke, and the Air Quality Control Board, has a lot to say about when prescribed fires can take place. This is just kind of somebody starting, I think it's not at the field station. I worked at a UC field station, and we have done prescribed burning there. It's in oak woodlands, but try to do it every couple of years. But even last year there was one. I retired a few years ago, but it got away. It didn't turn bad, but weather can change after you light the fire. But this is sort of the goal. This is an oak woodland. You can see fairly low intensity fire. There's not a lot of white ash. There are trees that are on the ground. There's material. So this is considered good. It creates a much better situation in terms of fire safety for the future. But as I mentioned, there can be problems. This is a fire that was set at the field station, I think probably 5 or 6 years ago. But unfortunately, the wind shifted. It didn't escape. It did what it was supposed to do, but it blew smoke into Nevada City and got them madder than a hornet's nest up there. I mean, for a day or two, they had to live with smoke. And so this was, UC heard about this. So that's one of the concerns. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about fire history and prescribed fire. I'd like to talk now about the effects of fire on native California oaks. Now, we've heard a lot about the effects of fire on conifers, and really it's quite different. Conifers are an evergreen species. Some oaks are evergreen also, but as Susie mentioned, if all the leaves are killed on a conifer, if all of them turn brown or removed, that tree is pretty much dead. Not so with oaks. Oaks, I don't know if they've evolved different. I mean, they have evolved differently, but they're a fire-adapted species, and so they can survive fires better than conifers, and they've lived with fire throughout their evolutionary period. This was a prescribed fire at the Sierra Field Station. I mentioned the Sierra Field Station. It's located near Marysville, kind of low elevation foothill woodlands, and that's where I was stationed for 25 years. It's basically a big 6,000 acre cattle ranch, but we did a lot of research on oaks and on wildlife and on range and on lots of other natural resource related subjects. I show this picture because you can see there was a pretty low intensity fire. All the leaves on the oak turned brown. It was hot enough. It doesn't have to get very hot to turn the leaves brown. I think, okay, basically it doesn't look terribly brown, but on my slide here, it's really brown. In the next slide, it's really green. This is a picture of the same tree. I tried to frame it, but obviously I didn't have the aperture adjusted quite right. But the tree looks beautiful the next year. And this is very common for oak trees. All the leaves can be scorched. The tree can look like it's dead or in a doornail, and the next year it will recover. And I say that to have you all appreciate that even though a tree looks horrible, don't necessarily cut it down, because leaf damage is not an indication of how well it is. These oaks, this one I'm showing is a blue oak. You also have valley oak and California black oak. These are all deciduous oaks. They lose their leaves anyway. Now we're a little bit early, so we don't particularly want them to lose their leaves in this regard, but they're going to lose them anyway, and they're going to come back and grow a new set of leaves the following year. Now, it is very different, however, if you have a much hotter fire. You can see that the base of this tree is engulfed. I have never followed this tree up because I borrowed this slide from a colleague, but I do not have good prospects for this tree after the damage it's suffered. The critical factor on oaks is whether or not the cambium, which is that kind of growing area under the bark, has been lethally damaged. If the fire is so hot that it has been lethally damaged, then the tree's going to die. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail in the afternoon talk. I think I'm going to pass on these few slides because I think they would be better, because I want to spend a fair amount of time talking about oak regeneration. Okay, so these I'm all going to show later. I would like to talk, though, aside from the fact that oaks can lose all their leaves and recover fine the next year, they also have the ability to sprout. And as Susie said, most conifers, with redwood being an exception, don't have the ability to sprout. Oaks, on the other hand, even if the top part of the tree, the bole has been lethally damaged, will sprout. And many of the trees we see today in California are remnants that have survived after previous fires. You see a lot of multiple stem trees. Sometimes you walk through the forest and you see trees that are 70, 80, 100 years old, and they all have multiple stems. And you know that probably these trees are survivors from previous fires, very hot fires, which killed the above ground part of the tree. We have done a little bit of research on whether or not treating these sprouts can hasten the time when the oak forest is going to come back as an oak forest. And what we found is that, a lot of times somebody might come along and cut down the bole, take it away for firewood. It's really not doing any good. If it's a large tree near kind of residences, it may pose some kind of a risk. But then you get this plethora of sprouts. What do? We have found that if you trim, if you reduce them, if you thin them, and in this particular study, it was a firewood cutting, and so it wasn't as a result of a fire, but trees had been killed, and we went back and pruned the sprouts to half a dozen to start with, and those sprouts on average grew faster than these. If you got all these little sprouts, they're not going to grow very fast. So that can be a strategy for trying to enhance the sprouts to eventually form into maybe 2 or 3, but not this huge number that creates a bush. Now, that brings up another problem. Does this make the area prone to fires in the future? As I mentioned, blue oak, valley oak, and black oak are all deciduous oaks, but there are a couple of non-deciduous oaks, evergreen oaks. We call them live oaks that grow in this area also. Interior live oak. And I'm not going to throw out scientific names, but the live oaks are interior live oak and canyon live oak, and those are very common in these foothill environments. They don't lose their leaves. They're always regrowing new leaves and losing leaves, but they're green all the time. That's why we call them evergreen or live oaks. But they tend to sprout very vigorously after fires. The sprouts grow faster, and they can create these massive clumps if they're not treated. And, you know, that can make you nervous down the road, because if you've got a forest that used to have single bole trees and 20 years later they're all 12 feet tall with these multiple branches, that obviously is a different environment and one that's prone to more serious fires. So, you know, some people like to thin them out, some people want to remove those. That certainly are some choices in terms of tree management. Okay, let's, I'm going to just kind of reiterate, oaks have evolved in this environment. Burning the leaves has little long-term impact. They're able to resprout, and I said reduction in fires. I'm not going to talk about that right now. Let's go on. Okay, effects of fire on seedlings especially. I've kind of talked about mature tree, but even in low intensity fires, little seedlings are generally, the top is killed. The reason being that they have very thin bark if they're small, and the cambium, or that living tissue underneath the bark, is killed. But almost all of these will resprout, and they do set the seedlings back, but fire does not seem to have a big effect. There have been some people who've suggested that maybe as you may know, there's some concern about oaks, oak management, and poor natural regeneration of oaks. It's one of the reasons the program I worked for 25 years was started, that people noticed areas where oaks weren't regenerating very well. Well, there's been some suggestion that maybe fire exclusion has contributed to that, and in some cases it may, but it doesn't seem to be a primary factor. But the thinking is that, you know, if you exclude fires, then oaks are competing with everything else. If you have repeated fires, then it kills the competitors but allows the oaks to resprout, and so they have better kind of sustainability and natural regeneration. Okay, I'm going to talk about this in the afternoon talk also. So now I'd like to talk about artificial regeneration. We did have a number of questions I heard in the morning about regenerating conifers, and obviously if you're in a conifer stand, a little higher elevation, everything was ponderosa pine, that's probably what you want to go with. Though Susie suggested at the lower elevation of that, with global climate change, there may be in 100 years not as suitable for ponderosa pine, may be better for oaks. So let's just talk a bit about, if you do want to regenerate oaks, how do you go about it? Oh, did I do something bad? Okay, no, I didn't do something terribly bad, just a little bit. These are acorns. This is a valley oak acorn. Valley oaks are those big trees that grow usually near water, near riparian areas, you know, in the Sacramento Valley, Visalia, Stockton. There's some remnant stands of massive valley oaks. Unfortunately, valley oaks were good indicators of agricultural land in settlement times, which led to their downfall. So there's probably less than 10% of the valley oaks that there were historically. They have a very big acorn. Those acorns there are probably about 2 inches long, and they have a lot of stored food. So it's unlike conifer seeds, even those Jeffrey pines that are pretty big, an oak has 10 times more energy to get it to grow. You can collect, I would recommend, if you want to undergo some kind of an oak regeneration with acorns, you collect the acorns directly from the branches. We found that if they fall to the ground, and especially if they're there during hot weather, they dry out. And even a week of laying on the ground, you know, we did some studies where we looked at the percent of moisture loss can reduce their viability considerably. So yeah, if you collect them directly from the trees, they're almost always good. You don't want to collect them too soon. If you wait too late, the squirrels may get them. Now is the perfect time. I mean, usually mid-October is when these things. Now, if the tree's been burned up, you're not going to be finding a lot of acorns on it, but there are other trees around, and generally you like to select the trees in a similar environment to where you plant them. So you wouldn't want to go collect coast live oak from Fort Bragg and bring them over here. And somebody before the session started mentioned there's also a concern about sudden oak death, which is a disease of several oaks just on the coast, but you wouldn't want to be buying seedlings that were grown at nurseries probably on the coast in the 12 counties that are infected with sudden oak death and bring them over here. Local is better. How local is local? Well, we don't have seed zones like they do for conifers, but the conifer seed zones generally say 500 feet in elevation. If if you got a tree that's growing at 1,000 feet, you don't want to be collecting it from a tree that's growing over 1,500 feet or below 500. They say 50 miles north and south. Now, I'd shrink those down for oaks, but we really don't know for sure. If the acorns do fall to the ground, these are some black oaks on the ground, like I say, they can dry out. You can generally have a good you can discriminate between the good ones and the bad ones by doing a float test. The sinkers are the good ones, the floaters are the bad ones. So in this kind of a test, you discard the ones that have floated to the top. The reason being that if they've aborted, if they have an insect hole, if they dried out, all those things are going to make them float. And so the sinkers, they've maintained enough moisture content, they're the better acorns. The valley oak, the blue oak, these are in a white oak subgenera. There's white oaks and there's black oaks. Well, basically, what it means is these things are ready to go. They don't have what's called embryo dormancy. They don't need stratification or tricking them into thinking they've gone through a winter. They're ready to germinate, and these are some acorns that were probably collected in September, October, and left in a refrigerator. After a month, they'll start to do this. So you don't have a lot of time. When you collect the acorns, I think it can be good to pre-germinate them. Then you know that that thing is ready to go. But you want to plant them fairly early. We did a study where we planted at different time periods. And planting them, by the first of the year, certainly by the 1st of February, if you're directly sowing them in the ground, is advantageous because they will send down a root even in the middle of winter. Whereas if you wait till March, the soil could already be starting to dry out, they haven't got this head start, and they don't grow as well or survive as well. You could also, grow them, produce seedlings like in a nursery. These are milk carton. These are like 2 inches in diameter or square across, about 10 inches deep. This is a good thing. Oaks have a tremendous interest in developing a deep root system. So the problem you have, a 1 gallon pot is not the best container for growing oaks because the root will go down even before, you plant an acorn, before the top emerges, the shoot emerges, the root will go down and start spiraling around the bottom. So in some of these container systems, we have something that causes the roots to root prune at the bottom so they don't circle around. Well, okay, now you've collected your acorns, you put them through a float test, then you put them in the refrigerator to store them, you're ready to plant. Unfortunately, there are some serious obstacles to success out in the field, and one of them is there's often very dense competing vegetation. Now actually, that's probably one of the advantages of fire areas. You're not going to have as dense competing vegetation. So that's probably good. But if I've done most of my research in oak woodlands. These are predominantly introduced Mediterranean annuals. They're not native to California. They suck that soil dry in the spring. They're all trying to complete their life cycle, and produce a seed, and then they die. But while they're doing that, they're very competitive. There is a little oak in there. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's having a tough time. And in addition, this kind of an environment creates habitat for some very damaging animals too. Okay, so that's one thing. How do you control this vegetation? Well, I think somebody else mentioned there's scalping, which is hoeing and removing the seed bank. There's mulching, there's mowing, there's herbicides, though understandably people are reluctant to use some of the herbicides for sure. But regardless, it's good to at least have a 4-foot circle around an individual seedling that's not going to look like that for the first 2 to 3 years. Okay, what's the other main obstacle? And that is animals. It seems that oaks are a favorite of a wide range of animals that want to consume them, both acorns and seedlings. You got little ones from grasshoppers and even smaller. We had some insects that went through aluminum window screen, and we thought, how are we going to prevent this? These are the first kind of seedling protectors we used. These are just aluminum window screen. They weren't that effective. We eventually evolved into using tree shelters, and you may have seen these around, certainly Caltrans in the last 10 or 15 years on highway interchanges uses them extensively. I've started to notice that the wine industry is now using these in some situations to protect, but we've had very good luck with these. They not only protect from the wide range of animals, I mentioned little ones like grasshoppers, but you've got rabbits, you've got gophers, you've got voles, you've got deer, and you have cows. Cows like to eat oaks too. So these seem to do pretty well. We put them up with a pretty heavy metal fence post, and while the cows would rub on them sometimes, they wouldn't generally destroy them. And these tree shelters create a very good environment for oaks specifically to grow in. It raises the relative humidity, it raises the carbon dioxide concentration, it raises the temperature, but not lethally. And so the oaks take off. I have on many occasions planted acorns of blue and valley oaks and had them grow to the top of a 3-foot tree shelter in a single season. So, oaks have a reputation of growing very slowly, and I think that's because they keep getting nibbled on. But under certain environmental conditions, they can grow well. The other advantage of these tree shelters is they tend to condense the moisture. Leaves of all green plants lose moisture through their little pores, called transpirational moisture loss, and that condenses on the sides of the shelters inside and then flows back down. So invariably, even in summer, if you come and dig around the bottom of these, you find the soil's moist. So I think that may be the biggest advantage of tree shelters. Here's just a picture. This actually was on the cover of California Agriculture, I think about 20 years ago. But here are some tree shelters, and you can see this is the one established oak in this plot, but these are all 10-year-old oaks, and they seem to be doing extremely well in the tree shelters. There also, we did a study here a few years ago where we looked at putting tree shelters over volunteer or naturally growing seedlings. If you go out in the environment, not right after a fire, but you generally can find a lot of little seedlings. I mean, not always. There are places where you can't, but we found enough to do a study at 6 different sites throughout the state, and then we put tree shelters on these natural or what we call volunteer seedlings, and then had a companion seedling that we found within 10 feet that we didn't put a shelter on, and we found that this really did hasten their growth and their ability. Another study we found if an oak gets up to about 4 feet, then it's not necessarily home free, but it's much closer to being home free. The browsing pressures from both livestock and deer seem to be much less. Their snoots are lower than that, and they don't, try to climb up and get them. I mean, if you put them in, in a feedlot, that's not the same situation. But in general, if you get the oaks up to about 4 feet, then they have a much greater, a very high likelihood of continuing to grow and becoming a tree. Okay, this probably is going to be covered in a previous talk, so I'm not going to dwell on it very much, but just they're obviously, this is not a new situation, wildfires. It's going to happen in the future, and there are certainly things that can be done. There are, the Public Resources Code stipulates what you have to do in terms of not having fire-prone vegetation near your house. I think in 2003 there was this horrible fire in San Diego County that burned half the county, and they changed the Public Resources Code. So, maintaining non-combustible areas near the home is certainly very important for reducing the likelihood that even in a future fire you're going to lose your home. There are lots of different ways of doing this, from hand clearing to prescribed fire to mastication. None of them are easy and none of them are cheap, but obviously the aftermath of horrible fires is even more expensive. There's a bunch of new information on building and construction techniques. I know when Susie had the Aurora fires up in Lake Tahoe here 7 or 8 years ago, a colleague came up, and very popular, he would light these structures on fire, that had different roofs or had different soffit patterns, and to kind of give people a very strong feel of what types of construction is resistant and what isn't. So I think everybody knows that untreated wooden shingles or shakes are not a good idea on houses anymore. And this is a thing of the past. They look beautiful, I remember putting some on a barn up in Oregon, and I loved them, but not very good if you're living in an area where there's fire. Okay, there are a lot of information sources. I retired over 4 years ago. This is a slide from before that, so for all I know, there's some of them are out of business now, but I hope that this information will be available. I would like to promote, there's a website called the Oak Management website through UC and Cooperative Extension, and this has a lot of information, including, I'm not sure what you got in your packets, but I know there's burned oaks, which ones will survive, fire and oak woodlands, and there's also a publication called Regenerating Rangeland Oaks in California. This is a 60-page document that tells you everything you want to know about how to go about collecting acorns, growing seedlings, planting them, protecting them, maintaining them in the field. And that is available on this website, and you can just go there and download it. It was published about 15 years ago, but it's out of print now, so this is pretty much the only way you can get it. I'm going to, I think, end there and try to leave enough time to take a few questions before we retire for lunch. Okay, first.
You talked about thinning the sprouts.
Yes.
Every time I thin sprouts, another 20 come up. Is there a technique to thinning the sprouts so they don't come back?
The question was, how do you thin sprouts so they don't come back? I have had similar problems. Though, I guess I found when I've tried to remove them all, when we were getting rid of a tree, we cut it down, we had a hard time keeping them from coming back. We even used, it was great fun, one of those fire torches, burn them, did nothing. Probably the best thing I can say, and I'm not sure it's terribly practical, but the lower you go, if you can prune them just below the ground, and that does mean a little bit of excavation, then they don't have the dormant buds down there that cause them to regrow. So persistence, repeating, in the study with blue oak in a fairly dry environment by Red Bluff, we didn't get, there was still a bunch on them. We didn't get more sprouts being generated when we pruned them back to 4 or 5, but that may be an artifact of the environment where we were going. Yes,
Is a tree shelter simply
Question was, is a tree shelter PVC or something else? It's actually polypropylene, and it's double-walled, like cardboard, where they have little things. And this, they were developed in England, 30 years ago. And they've tried to make them so they photodegrade, so you don't have to go out and remove them. Now, I'm not sure that's a very good idea to have all these little bits of plastic, and it seems pretty easy to remove them. You take a razor knife. But to answer your question, they're polypropylene. They are subject to UV degradation, but they can mix things, chemicals in it to have them last the appropriate amount of time. In that book, Regenerating Rangeland Oaks, at the back there's sources of information, and there are lists of distributors. One of them is Tubex back in Minneapolis, but there's several others, and they've become much more popular. Okay, I'm going to go to the back. Yeah. The question was, would a tree shelter help a sprout? Absolutely. And if you were able to, prune them all back to one or two and put them in that tree shelter, that would promote it. However, sprouts tend to grow pretty vigorously. I think the benefit of tree shelter is more for a direct-seeded acorn or a small seedling, just because sprouts, they've got this whole massive root system that's contributing to a very small above ground growth, so they generally grow pretty fast anyway. Follow up?
Different question.
Okay.
With the fire damaged live oaks, if they are cut, does that stimulate earlier sprouting? Which I've noticed on some of the trees on my place, the ones I had to cut.
Yeah.
They're sprouting, and the ones that are just as damaged.
Yeah.
Not cut.
I think it probably does. I know that, there was a huge effort to modify and get rid of oaks in the 50s and 60s, where they, whole sections were denuded of oaks, especially in the northern Sacramento Valley. And that was a problem, the sprouts coming back. So at that time they used some chemicals that they would paint on the stumps to keep them from sprouting. I'm honestly not sure if that's still legal, because obviously herbicides have come under greater scrutiny, but I think it may still be. Okay, right here. Okay, the question was, you got some oaks that have survived the fire, or maybe not even in a fire area. How should you manage them to keep them healthy? It's always been thought and supported by some research that irrigating oaks can be very damaging, especially during the summer, because it contributes to certain diseases like armillaria amelia, which is oak root fungus, or crown rot. Not crown rot, but crown something. But I think they found that, especially during droughts, by extending, by a few deep irrigations, late spring and early fall does benefit the seedlings. There's not the risk for those diseases is greater when you keep the soil saturated throughout the summer. And so, a lot of times you'll see sprinklers in lawns where they have oak trees growing in them, and the trees die. I know it happens in many parks. So it's not good to irrigate them constantly, but a deep irrigation this time of year, I think, could benefit. Generally, they don't need fertilizer. They've kind of worked things out, and so that's not a problem. And as Scott mentioned, somebody mentioned, after fire, you generally get input of nutrients into the soil, so it's even less probably relevant at that point. Okay, right? Red, yeah.
Follow-up. I understood you to say there that the deep irrigation is on the seedling, but I think the question was about the surviving trees.
Yeah. No. I did mean for surviving trees. Deep irrigations, but again, it's the little, drip irrigation every day all summer. It's the real problem. A deep irrigation, there have been some studies, and the trees do respond, especially during a drought. And my gosh, we've had I'm amazed you got some rain here last week. We sure didn't in Grass Valley, or, maybe a tenth of an inch in the last 3 months. So it's a very dry year. Now, generally, oaks have evolved in drought, so it's not like in the coast, there certainly are trees dying from drought, but I haven't seen that as chronic in the Sierra Nevada. Yes? Yeah. The question is, can acorns be stored longer than a month? Generally, no. You can't store them for a whole season, and that's one of the advantages of conifers. There was mentioned the seed place in Davis. I've been there. They can put ponderosa pine seed, they get them down to real low moisture content and real cold, sub-zero freezer. They can last for 20 years, and then they can bring them out after a fire and propagate seedlings. Oaks, you can't do that. You're kind of dependent on current year's acorn crop. And I'm so out of it that I know where I work, blue oaks and valley oaks are fairly good, but acorn cycles go up and down, and I really don't know much about what it is here, but you are dependent on this year's acorn crop. You could probably store them for maybe at most 2 months, and the black oaks a little bit longer, but the white oaks, 6 weeks is probably your maximum.
Are they stored in water?
No, you soak them, and then I like to surface dry them because there are some molds and other microorganisms that can harm them. Some people use Captan or bleach, but I've never really found that necessary. So you surface dry them, you put them in a refrigerator, not a freezer. Freezer's bad. And the biggest damage to acorns is drying out. So even a paper bag in the refrigerator is probably not good. I'd recommend a plastic bag, but leave it open so you can get a little air circulation. If it's a Ziploc, maybe don't zip it all the way. Okay, yes?
Some of the oaks, it burns so hot.
Yeah.
The bark is just white. Is
Yeah.
that just dead tree? There's no hope for it?
That's not a good sign. I'm going to talk about that, and I did have some slides about what you're looking for in terms of the bark and underneath the bark to determine if a tree's been, and I'll talk about that in the afternoon session. Okay, way in the back, standing up. Okay, the question was specifically in relation to sudden oak death. Should you wait because maybe it's a problem? Sudden oak death has never been found in the Sierra Nevada. Strictly a coastal phenomenon. I was on the task force for many years, and I'm a little bit out of the loop now, but there was one report in Forest Hill, but it turned out to be a false positive, and so it's never been reported. And also the species, the main oak species, it does get black oak, but it's mainly coast live oak and tan oak. Those are the two real big species. Okay, good. Yes? The question was, people are speculating that live oaks carry fire better and contributed to the severity of this fire. And I think that's probably true, largely because live oaks can be very bushy and have, this multiple stemmed appearance as a result of historic fires. So I would say in terms of replanting or trying to reestablish oaks, I don't think it's a bad idea to skew the mixture over to the non-live oaks or the blue oak or the valley oak. You don't want to be having whole-scale changes, but I agree that live oaks can be, and they generally don't grow as a single stem tree as much as the blue oaks and the valley oaks. So I think that makes some sense to maybe think about planting non-live oaks as a higher percent of what maybe they occurred previously. The question is, should you grow a seedling from an acorn or plant an acorn or dig up an oak where you have too many of them and you could plant it? Generally, transplanting oaks is very difficult. The reason being that, like you said, they have a very deep taproot, or not even a taproot, they just have deep roots. I wish I'd thrown in a slide that shows we planted some acorns in boxes and they had 3-foot roots and 2-inch tops, and that's what they're trying to do. Now nature The soil's a little more compact because of 100 years of grazing, so it's harder to go down 3 feet. But in general, they do have very deep roots. And so when you try to transplant, you're going to lose a fair amount of that. And it's not going to be easy. Oaks can grow quite vigorously from acorns. I mean, and planting them in little containers and then transplanting them, or directly planting acorns, I think is advantageous. Okay, good question. How deep do you plant the acorns? I'd say about 1 inch. There have been some studies about point up or point down or sideways. I mean, scientists, we got to have something to look at. I think planting them flat, because an acorn, has a pointed end and has the end where the cup is. You want to remove that cup before you plant it. But the pointed end, the shoot comes out and the root comes out both. So, if it's flat, but I'd say about 1 inch. Some people might suggest, like Johnny Appleseed, just throwing acorns out. Well, you're going to be followed by a horde of squirrels probably if you do that. So you definitely, when they're under the ground, they're less vulnerable to critters, but they're not protected, so you may need to, put a tree shelter or a plastic mesh cage or something else over it. Okay, oaks can lose their leaves early as a result of drought. Another thing we studied, and we found that it's very common. In '76, before I moved back to California, apparently, there was huge bare areas. In 1989, we did a study where on August 17th, I'd been away and I came back to the field station. Most of the blue oaks had lost their leaves. Now, usually the blue oaks don't lose their leaves till Thanksgiving. So this is like 3-4 months early. So we followed 100 trees that lost their leaves and 100 that didn't, and they all recovered. So early leaf loss, especially of deciduous oaks or ones that lose their leaves normally, is a fairly common, and it's happening this year. And I'm sure master gardeners get lots of questions. People say, oh, my oaks are dying. They've all turned brown. That's something that happens repeatedly, and it's the oak's way of dealing with limited moisture. If you drop your leaves, you're not transpiring anymore, so you're not losing moisture, which could become lethal if it gets so dry. But that being said, repeated droughts can't be good for trees. Some trees do die. If a live oak loses all its leaves, I'd definitely be concerned. Great. I hope everybody heard that, but basically she said to protect acorns that are directly seeded, a little bit of gravel does wonders for a variety of reasons.
Okay, thank you so much, Doug. Our first presenter is Jan Bray. Jan is a registered professional forester, and you've probably heard that term already once today. Adam had made a reference to it. What I really appreciate about Jan's background is Jan is recently retired from CAL FIRE, so knows the regulatory process, but also the framework in which forestry is done at the statewide level and all the regulations that are part of it. And now she is more of a practitioner of on-the-ground recommendations using her registered professional forestry license. And so Jan's going to talk about the role of an RPF and what that would mean to some of you that may have commercial tree species on your property, and whether or not you need to look to someone like herself in that role and capacity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jan.
The role of the RPF. This is utilizing excerpts from a California Licensed Foresters Association letter that was developed after the Angora fire up near Lake Tahoe. RPFs are keenly interested in the ecological health and sustainability of our wildland and forested landscapes. This includes the growing menace of uncontrolled wildfire and the wake of its tragic social, economic, and environmental effects. A multitude of large and damaging fires which resulted in human deaths have most unfortunately become more commonplace in the past 10 years. The Valley and Butte fires were the most recent of these tragic wildfires. Governor Brown declared a state of emergency and issued a proclamation because of the extreme damage caused by the Butte fire in Calaveras County. As foresters, it's our hope that ongoing input on fire and forestry issues will be helpful to policymakers within and outside of the Butte fire boundary. The role of RPFs in forest management and the treatment of hazardous fire conditions can assist in preventing future tragedy fires. Here's some of my suggestions. Hands-off management is not a working strategy. The era of well-intended but misguided forest neglect must come to a close. By incorporating the lessons of recent catastrophic fires, including the 2009 Angora fire in the Tahoe Basin, the Rim fire in Tuolumne and Mariposa counties in 2013, the 2014 King fire in El Dorado County, and this year's Valley fire in Lake County, and our own Butte fire here in Amador and Calaveras counties. Hopefully, we'll receive greater public attention and support for fuels management treatments. The critical determinant will be whether there is adequate political will and courage to implement landscape-level solutions to the problem. And simply put, the problem is an excessive and unnatural buildup of flammable brush and trees in the forest. Forest densities and excessive tree mortality as a result of 4 years of drought and consequently large stands of dead insect-killed trees have set the stage for extreme fire behavior. The insect infestation can be seen from any of our communities, and it's moving from the south and it's moving towards the east. So it's moving north and east. And I've seen it just recently. On Monday, I was coming back through West Point and headed over to Amador County, and the bug kill stands that I'd seen a month ago have now doubled in size. The era of well-intended but misguided forest neglect is important to isolate and understand. Much as a doctor seeks to track down a specific disease agent in order to properly treat the underlying illness. Foresters identify 2 societal factors responsible for the long-term accumulation of flammable fuels in the forest. Both arose in the 20th century, and both of them were well-intended. The first is the long-standing Smokey Bear fire control policy. It had a heavy emphasis on fire suppression, but prevention only to the extent of minimizing ignition factors like cigarettes, campfires, and matches. Instead of investing in ways to prevent these devastating wildfires from occurring, we instead wait for the fire to happen, then expect unlimited money to be spent on suppression with more and increasingly difficult structure protection in our rural settings. The second societal factor was, and remains, a tendency on the part of some to assume that nature, left undisturbed, is in fact entirely self-regulating. This view overlooks the presence and impact of humans on the landscape, not just since westernization, but for thousands of years before that. Perceptions of what is natural in the outdoor environment often conflict with conservation efforts designed to ensure a desired future condition, such as ecological resiliency in response to wildfires. In other words, the impulse towards preservation often trumps conservation, and they have negative outcomes for both objectives. By embracing the need for preventative fuel treatments, not only in the wildland-urban interface, or WUIs, as we call them, but out in the broader forest landscape. Foresters are calling for a clean break from the past suppression strategies. We instead need an all-lands approach to wildfire prevention through fuels management based on topography and strategic fire-stopping locations, whether they be on private land, public lands, or a combination of those lands. Some activists still believe, however, that it is only appropriate to conduct fuel treatments in WUI areas, apparently reasoning that allowing the remainder of the forest to burn is consistent with natural processes and therefore the loss of property and all other resources is acceptable. Clearly, review and careful consideration of tragedy fires confirm that the public has lost patience with such a limited view of both people and nature. As foresters and working environmentalists, we continue to work toward building trust and public support for active management to achieve multiple objectives. These include forest health, fire suppression effectiveness, ecological resilience, carbon sequestration and storage, water quality and quantity, wildlife habitat, aesthetics, and healthy economies and communities. The forester's role is to help the landowner achieve his or her objectives, as well as provide the technical expertise which includes improvement of natural resources, creating a safe and beautiful environment around your house. By getting beyond this era of well-intended but misguided forest neglect, foresters ensure that landowners may achieve their goals in the most efficient, economical, and environmentally sound manner. This is complementary to the forester's broader focus on an all lands concept, that one ownership is part of a bigger whole, and by making individual parcels safe from fire, we are assisting in and highlighting the need to make the larger landscape safe from fire. By starting with individual parcels and landowners, fire safety education is spread over the back fence from trusted neighbor to neighbor. Multiple efforts then make the watershed healthier and benefit multiple landowners and entire communities. In order to effect these changes and put an end to the outdated era of Smokey Bear suppression emphasis, increasing the funding for fuel treatments must occur. Conducted properly, forest management done right should not be a financial burden on the public. Our experience is that, depending on a number of variables, the cost of comprehensive fuel treatments can be managed. And yes, we can combine commercial logging with fuel treatments, provide products that people need, and put people to work. Market forces can play an invaluable role in finding productive uses for wood products. Their utilization helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The reduction of forest fuels on the landscape reduces the potential for wildfire conflagrations and provides opportunities for firefighting personnel to stop fires at strategic locations. As we move beyond this era of well-intended but misguided forest neglect, we must also challenge a well-intended but misguided ideology that opposes management of public lands. Approximately 15% of the land that was burned under the Butte fire is public land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. These lands, being our lands, must be managed with fuels treatments in mind. As long as the desired outcome is attained, what harm is there in reducing project cost, getting more acres treated, creating jobs in the woods, and making homegrown products and providing energy? Foresters are part of the solution, but there's often a misunderstanding about the role and intent of foresters, often promulgated by those who want a hands-off approach to the forested landscape. Foresters are licensed to practice and promote healthy and sustainable land management principles. I believe we are the true environmentalists. In addition to the governor's emergency proclamation, the Board of Forestry recognizes a shift in public understanding about the severity of the wildfire threat and the need for preventative action. The board has added more flexibility, which allows salvage logging after a fire by using the exemption process. The board recognizes the difficulty landowners experience in restoring their land after such devastation. The RPF role then is to help you, as the landowner, work through the regulatory process and ensure that while utilizing the expedited exemption process for timber harvesting, compliance with environmental laws and protection measures are achieved. You don't have to be technically trained to realize that a lot of work needs to be done to restore overstocked, degraded, and highly flammable wildlands in the Sierra Nevadas and throughout the West. But the good news is that past treatments have repeatedly shown to be effective in lowering risk and damage to life, property, and natural resources. Such examples of success exist on the Butte fire. One is just north of the town of McCullummy Hill, where a prior fuel break was burned, utilized as a backburn, and it prevented the wildfire from actually reaching the town itself. Another one is in Pine Acres in Amador County. Foresters support active management to help achieve landowner objectives and societal goals, and especially in preventing the loss of property and the protection and enhancement of landowners' natural resources. To this end, the CalAm team, a volunteer group of retired foresters and other specialists, have banded together in Amador and Calaveras counties to promote improved land management. We have prepared and submitted multiple grants for fuels reduction projects. Many of our proposed fuels reductions were located directly where new fire breaks were constructed under the Butte fire suppression activities. These fire breaks likely would have, had they been installed and maintained, likely could have halted the forward spread of the fire. Foresters are available here at this workshop and any time afterward to assist you in your land management efforts. And I have included some handouts, I believe they're in your packet there, that go over the role of a forester and also have a list of RPFs, foresters, and LTOs. Those are licensed timber operators or loggers. So that's available. Feel free to call us, and Godspeed to all of you.
Okay, so thank you, Jan, and Jan will be around the rest of the afternoon, so if you have more questions that you think of specific to the role of an RPF, you can speak with Jan. We're going to bring Doug back on, and he's going to talk more about oaks and which ones are going to survive, and maybe just have an opportunity to ask more questions. And so turn it back over to Doug. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I didn't read the program outline very carefully, so I just prepared one talk. So now we're going to start in a section that I thought I'd save for this part. So talking about whether a tree has been killed or whether it's just been, cosmetically kind of altered is paramount question, because you don't want to be cutting down trees that may survive. And as I mentioned, leaves are really not a good indicator. Leaves can be, scorched and the tree can come back and be perfectly normal the next year. The critical factor for whether or not the bole, the above ground part of the tree, is going to survive or die is how damaged the cambium is. And on this slide, kind of get a sense here for the cambium is kind of this layer right underneath the bark. So right in here, this is kind of old bark and new bark. But this area, which is where it actually transports all the food for the tree from the foliage, which through photosynthesis is manufacturing this food, down to the root system, if that kind of pathway is killed, the trees can eventually die, though it may not die immediately. So really the critical factor is how badly has that been damaged. So the trees with thicker bark makes sense. The bark is a very good insulator. I mean, wine corks, corks that I remember putting cork on my ceiling once. It's it's got a lot of air spaces in it, and it really is not a very good conductor of heat. So if you got a thick bark, then a tree is less likely to have the cambium damaged. And we talked about the sprouting and the defoliation. So essentially, there's some species that seem to have thicker bark, though there are some publications. As I recall, I was talking to somebody at Break that canyon live oak seems to have a fairly thick bark. You probably have heard of cork oak, which is where corks actually come from, and that has very thick bark. Cork oak is native to the Iberian Peninsula or Spain and Portugal and not to California. But if any of you are UC Davis students or have been on campus, most of the large oaks on that campus are in fact cork oaks. I mention that just because cork oak has a very thick bark, which amazingly enough, when you peel it off, grows back. Usually if you girdle a tree, in other words, you remove the bark, the cambium dies, but not so for cork oak. Though that is an aside. So how do you tell if that cambium has been damaged? Well, there are some indications if you can get down to it. Now, I'm a little reluctant to say this because it looks like, to get to see this bark, they chopped into the tree. Now, and if you wanted to see if the cambium was damaged all the way around, you'd chop in all the way around. Well, that would not be a good strategy because unlike cork oak, that's going to kill the tree. But, assuming you had a huge tree or something and you just wanted to get a feel for if there was damage to the cambium, then you could, perhaps chop in. Here it's a little hard to see, but this is, fairly... It's a little hard to tell from this particular slide, but the cambium here is right underneath the bark. Pointer doesn't seem to be doing real well, but that whitish area. If it's white, if it's fleshy, if it's still moist, it's probably still alive and hasn't been lethally damaged. If, on the other hand, it's dark, it's dry, it maybe smells of decay, then there's a good indication that the cambium has been damaged and the tree is going to die. If it has been damaged all the way around. Now, a lot of fires will move, a direction, and part of the tree can be damaged, one side of the tree can be damaged much more than the other side. Even, I've read, if there's only 10% of the cambium that's alive, the tree can still survive. So, even if you see severe damage on one side, the tree may still survive and sprout. Now, a lot of these trees are probably not killed immediately. They may go down over time, but it may take 20 years. And I think for most people, especially if they have a landscape tree that they're fond of or that they enjoy having, 20 years is a pretty long time, better than nothing. The tops of the seedlings are killed even with low intensity fires, but they are able to sprout back, and often quite vigorously. And with all the competing vegetation removed, they may grow substantially. Okay, here are just some general guidelines. They're not original. There was a publication, it's before I started in '86, so it's probably over 30 years old, and it talks about damage to 5 species of oaks in California. I know Tim Plum was one of the authors, but these are sort of their general recommendations. So if trees are smaller, they're going to have thinner bark, and if they're scorched all the way around their base, they're probably dead. Now, if trees are larger, but they have reductions in bark thickness, now that I think is a real key. Somebody had asked me at lunch about, specific damage to tree, and just having black bark does not necessarily mean the tree has been severely damaged, because, it's when you get the reductions in bark thickness. So when it's so severe that it actually reduces the thickness of the bark, that's an indication that there could be problems. If trees are greater than 12 inches in diameter, they're continuous charring with pronounced reduction in bark, not a good sign. And finally, trees that are located in high-risk areas if they fell down. So there can be kind of a trade-off where if you're trying to determine if a tree's been damaged, but the likelihood of some really adverse consequences of a tree falling down, you're probably going to err on the side of caution, and certified arborists can certainly help you make that determination. Okay, that pretty much were all the comments I had about identifying damage. I guess the take-home message is, though, that unless there's a real need to cut the trees down, I think that waiting at least a year to see if they leaf out makes a lot of sense. There's not much commercial value in oaks. Certainly they're used for firewood, and I suspect a lot of you do some home heating with wood, and there's a market. But on the stump, at least 15, 20 years ago, we were talking about $25 a cord. You know, if it's cut and stacked, it might go up by a factor of 10. But it's not a terribly high value item. So there's not a lot of commercial potential for cutting these things down. I also suspect that the market will be flooded this year with firewood because there'll be a lot available, and certainly if somebody's trying to make money, the least distance you ship it, the better. So locally, you'll probably have no shortage of firewood here. So if you can wait and see if the tree leaves out next year, I think that really is to your advantage. So not a long talk, but I'll be glad to take some questions. Yes, and back. Now, you know, I don't have very much definitive to say. I'll repeat the question. It's about madrone, which is, I'm sure all of you know, it's Arbutus menzesii. It's a hardwood. It has what's called exfoliating bark, meaning the red bark kind of peels back. I presume that means that the bark is very thin, so you would think there would be more likely to be damage to the cambium in the same intense fire as a tree that had thicker bark. The fact that it's sprouting, I think, is a good sign. I mean, I know that after fires that occur in summer, in the fall, a lot of times the trees, especially when it starts to rain, it sounds like you at least had some rain down here, then the trees basically trying to come back. I mean, I've seen this happen in the same season where there's been damage, even drought defoliation. If there's a really early rainfall in the fall, some of these trees will start leafing out, and I think it's, you know, they're trying to take advantage of a situation. But other than that, I know so little about madrone. I know it's susceptible to a number of foliar diseases, and that can make them look like heck at times. But whether or not it is been lethally damaged by the fire, I don't know. You know, you might call in a certified arborist. Anybody here have any information on that? It's just kind of, yes, we've got someone. Okay, she's quoted from one of the publications that I guess is in your packet, indicating that like oaks, madrone is a sprouter. Unlike Douglas fir or white fir or whatever, it will sprout back after the top of the tree has been killed. There wasn't any information in that about, you know, damage to the top of the tree. So I don't know, Scott. It's just not something that I'm familiar with.
Because of that thin bark, like you mentioned, like you actually see the crowns typically die out, but they do sprout vigorously after fire.
Okay.
So we may be looking at, you know, removing a large portion of the above ground now, but you know, luckily if the root structure hasn't been too terribly damaged, you should get a lot of suffering.
Okay. So, and I would say that the same, you know, rules about possibly thinning out sprouts to promote the growth of the other ones would apply to that also. Yeah. Madrones keep their leaves, as far as I know, they're an evergreen, like. Yeah. But yeah, are all the leaves on the tree, have they all been scorched and removed?
No, they're hanging, but they look like an oak.
They look.
Is brown.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so again, I mean, even a live oak that's lost all its leaves, I think, I mean, I know can come back. So again, I would wait. Okay, all the way in the very back. Okay. Just to paraphrase, he sees madrones that do have some budding out, and I would echo the sentiment that if it's budded out, it means the buds haven't been killed, which indicates that the fire wasn't lethally hot at the very top, which is a good sign. Now, still the base could be killed, but I think, the bottom line is wait and see. Yes, over there. Okay, the observation was little chunks of bark have come off. Do you think there's an insect involved, or is this after the fire?
After the fire.
After the fire.
On the hot side of the fire.
Yeah, it's not good. But I'm not sure if it means the tree's dead. But anytime, things have been hot enough to cause the bark to come off the tree, that's a bad sign. So the question was which oaks to select for reforest in probably an area that was previously mostly conifers? Okay, I mean, yeah. I mean, a lot of, especially in the conifer areas, the most common probably oak would be black oak. I mean, it grows usually at a little higher elevation. It's mixed in with the conifers. It's part of that, kind of lower to mid elevation range where there's half a dozen different species of conifers and black oak and madrone. So that would be, you kind of want to plant what's suitable for that environment. So I'd say in previously conifer dominated landscapes, probably California black oak, which is also a deciduous oak. You probably know it, but it's got a big leaf and it's very pointed at the ends. It is a black oak, not a white oak, but it's actually great wood, but it's never been managed for wood in California. That would be my first choice. As you get to the lower elevation, then other species like blue oak and canyon live oak and interior live oak could be choices. From a wildlife standpoint, and that really hasn't been mentioned very much in this workshop, but wildlife habitat's very important, especially for the wildlife. And if mixtures of species generally are good. Mixtures of sizes, mixtures of species, mixtures of evergreen and deciduous, because wildlife, there are a lot of different wildlife and they require different things. And if you just have a monoculture, that has been, why people are thinking that planting millions of acres of eucalyptus or radiata pine may not be such a good idea, because it doesn't really, one reason, it doesn't have that wildlife habitat. So when you are selecting what species, you might think of mixing things, but you want to plant them where they have a good likelihood of growing and thriving, and you can tell that by comparing your site to other sites.
And necessarily replace.
Yeah.
I use the word favor.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say it was a conifer area, now it's only oaks, but maybe just favor them. So oaks are regenerating, don't plant conifers there.
Okay.
Or, do a mixture. I didn't want to give the impression that I need to change conifer area over oaks completely, but I would certainly emphasize the word favor.
Absolutely, and I echo that too. I don't want to give that impression, and that's a more diverse mixture that certainly benefits wildlife and possibly some other things. Yes.
So if you're going to try putting acorns out, how far apart? How close together? I totally, it's how much time and energy you want to put into it, but to make it so that you don't later have it too thick or too thin?
I hate that question. I always get that, and I never know how to answer it because it's so variable. It depends on so many things. Depends on, how successful you are. depends on what you want, and it depends on so many unforeseen factors that can happen. But that being said, it seems like in oak woodlands, kind of lower elevation blue oak woodlands that where I've generally worked, I'd say an upper limit that you're targeting would be 100 trees per acre, maybe a lower limit down to 20. You don't want to be planting thousands per acre. And a primary thing is, how successful are you going to be? Now, when you do intensive management, meaning doing weed control and protecting individual plants, I think, we've certainly had success well above 50%, sometimes 80 or 90%. But that's pretty intensive management. That's, going out and making sure the things don't get eaten and making sure they're not out-competed and doing it for a few years. But so 100 per acre is one every 20 feet. I think that's right. An acre is 208 feet on a side, so that would be 10 by 10. So 20 per acre would be every 20 feet, something like that, close to that. So, again, like I say, I don't know how to answer that with any certainty, but those are general recommendations. In back of the blue.
A fair number of oaks that had deadwood in them and mistletoe that we were planning on eradicating. Now, post-fire, the large oaks hopefully like half the trees will survive. Should we now address the dead material and mistletoe or wait and let the tree recover?
I guess going with the general theme of waiting is probably better. I'm not a huge advocate of mistletoe eradication, just because I've seen, driving to work, trees that had way more mistletoe than leaves. I mean, where the main green part of the tree was mistletoe, that have survived for 25 or 30 years. It's rare that mistletoe will kill a tree, and certainly even rarer that it will kill it in a short period of time. Mistletoe tends to concentrate in a few trees because birds eat the seed and then it passes through their system and then it lodges in a crack and the mistletoe grows. So usually there's just a few trees that are tremendously heavily infected. There are ways of getting rid of it, but you have to understand mistletoe is a plant with a root, and the root grows down into the wood, and if you just remove the green part of the plant, it's going to re-sprout. But that may take a fairly long time. Finally, mistletoe is good wildlife habitat. I mean, birds love the seeds and they're nutritious, and there used to be a market for selling it at Christmas, but I think that market is pretty saturated. Okay, yes. One more, blue, yes. Is there a reason why you wouldn't want to transplant incense cedar if you got some healthy young ones and you could put them back in an environment where they grew before?
Well, generally, cedar are a little bit less drought tolerant and a little more shade tolerant than your other trees. So if you have a big open area, my feeling in a lot of the foothills when I travel through and I see pines and cedars are shade tolerant. So what I'm constantly seeing is big pines with cedars underneath. And sometimes so many cedars that they're gnarly and gross and dripping and black. And so with the normal fire regime, we'd have a lot fewer cedars because there's what in the understory, and they'd be coming through and cleaning out those cedars, right? So somebody asked me at break, like, should I be replanting cedars? My answer was yes, but I don't think you want to necessarily replant it to the amount that was here, because the amount that was here was kind of an artifact of fire suppression. Because they're shade tolerant, they're coming in the understory, because it's not burning, you get this huge amount of cedar coming up, and you get cedar dominating the stand and thick and drippy and unhealthy. I've never seen so much unhealthy cedar as I have. I just went to Calaveras Big Tree State Park, and they're just dripping all over you with all sorts of diseases. Anyway, so that's to say, I like cedar, and I think it should be a component of what you replant, and it can do that, but don't make yourself think that because there was so much of it, that that's the amount you should replant. So I would certainly plant some. Yeah, transplanting, I think conifers would do a little bit better than oaks because they don't have as deep of a root, but it's definitely, you know, difficult to do. And if you transplant a larger tree, you might want to water it after you transplant it compared to a smaller tree.